Penguin.lit presents, Dickens, David Copperfield. David Copperfield, by Charles Dickens. Full title: The Personal History, Adventure, Experience, and Observation of David Copperfield the Younger of Blunderstone Rookery. Publication as a serial in 1849–50, and as a book in 1850. Synopsis: the story follows the life of David Copperfield from childhood to maturity. David was born in Balderstone, Suffolk, England, 6 months after his father's death. David spends his early years happily with his loving, childish mother and their kindly housekeeper, Clara Pegodi. They lovingly call him Davy. David's misfortune begins when his mother marries the violent Mr. Murdstone, who brings his strict sister Miss Murdstone into the house. They treat him cruelly and David bites Mr. Murdstone's hand during one beating. The Murdstones send David away to school. Pegodi takes David to visit her family in Yarmouth, where David meets Pegodi's brother Mr. Pegodi, and his 2 adopted children, Ham and little Emily. Mr. Pegodi's family lives in a boat turned upside down, a space they share with Mrs. Gummidge, the widowed wife of Mr. Pegodi's brother. After this visit, David attends school at Salem House, run by Mr. Creakle. David befriends and idolizes an egotistical young man named James Starterth. David also befriends Tommy Traddles, an unfortunate, fat young boy who is beaten more than the others. Partly through David's second semester at school, his mother dies shortly after giving birth to a baby boy, who also perishes. After that, Pegodi is dismissed, and she marries Barkis, who drives a wagon. David does not return to school, and when aged 10, he is sent to work at Murdstone's wine bottling factory in London. He lodges at the home of Mr. and Mrs. McAlber, a generous couple with financial disaster. Eventually, Mr. McAlber is sent to debtor's prison, after which David runs away to Dover to find his great-aunt, the self-sufficient Betsy Trotwood, and, on the advice of her simple-minded and mentally unstable boarder, Mr. Dick, she takes him in. Miss Betsy sends David to a school run by a man named Dr. Strong. David moves in with Mr. Wickfield and his daughter, Agnes. While he attends school, Agnes and David becomes best friends. Among Wickfield's boarders is Uriah Heep, a snake-like young man who often involves himself in matters that are none of his business. David graduates and goes to Yarmouth to visit Pegodi. David reflects on what profession he should pursue. On his way to Yarmouth, David encounters James Steerforth, and they take a detour to see Steerforth's mother. They drive in Yarmouth, where Steerforth and the Pegodis become fond of one another. When they return from Yarmouth, Miss Betsy persuades David to pursue a career as a proctor, a kind of lawyer. David apprentices himself at the London firm of Spenlow and Jorkins, and takes up lodgings with a woman named Mrs. Krupp. Mr. Spenlow invites David to his house for a weekend. There David meets Spenlow's daughter, Dora, and quickly falls in love with her. In London, David is reunited with Tommy Traddles and Mr. McAlber. Word reaches David through Steerforth that Mr. Barkis is fatally ill. David journeys to Yarmouth to visit Pegodi in her hour of need. Little Emily and Ham, now engaged, are to be married upon Mr. Barkis's death. David, however, finds little Emily upset over her impending marriage. When Mr. Barkis dies, little Emily runs off with Steerforth, who she believes will make her a lady. Mr. Pegodi is devastated, but vows to find little Emily and bring her home. Miss Betsy visits London to inform David that her financial security has been ruined because Mr. Wickfield has joined into a partnership with Uriah Heep. David, who has become increasingly infatuated with Dora, vows to work as hard as he can make to their life together possible. Mr. Spenlow, however, forbids Dora from marrying David. Mr. Spenlow dies in a carriage accident that night, and Dora goes to live with her two aunts. Meanwhile, Uriah Heep informs that he suspects Dr. Strong's wife, Annie, of having an affair with her young cousin, Jack Maldon. Dora and David marry, and Dora proves a terrible housewife, incompetent in her chores. David loves her anyway, and is generally happy. Mr. Dick facilitates a reconciliation between Dr. Strong and Annie, who is not, in fact, cheating on her husband. Miss Dartle, Mrs. Stardust's ward, summons David, and informs him that Steerforth has left little Emily. Miss Dartle adds that Stardust's servant, Litimer, has proposed to her, and that little Emily has run away. David and Mr. Pegodi enlist the help of little Emily's childhood friend Martha, who locates little Emily, and brings Mr. Pegodi to her. Little Emily and Mr. Pegodi decide to move to Australia, as do the McAlbers, who first save the day for Agnes and Miss Betsy by exposing Uriah Heep's fraud against Mr. Wickfield. David goes to Yarmouth to deliver a letter from Emily to Ham, but a dangerous storm arises. Several ships are lost, and one shipwreck occurs close enough to shore that Ham tries to swim out and save the last two survivors. Ham drowns, and when the body of one of the sailors is washed ashore, it proves to be Steerforth. David spends next 3 years in continental Europe, and when he returns, he marries Agnes, and they have several children, including a daughter named after his great-aunt, Betsy Trotwood. Finally, David happily returns to his profession of writing. Crucial points forming questions 1. Which of Dickens's novels is called his masterpiece as The Triumph of the Art of Dickens? Ans. David Copperfield. 2. Who is David's primary good influence? Ans. Agnes. 3. Who is David's primary bad influence? Ans. Steerforth. 4. Who is a dwarf character in the novel? Ans. Miss Mosher. 5. Why is David sent to Salem House? Ans. Because he bites Mr. Murdstone. 6. Which facial feature does Uriah lack? Ans. Eyelashes. 7. Which character most resembles to a snake? Ans. Uriah Heep. 8. Why does Miss Betsy keep running out of her house? Ans. For there are donkeys on her lawn. 9. Who flies a kite with David? Ans. Mr. Dick. 10. Which career does Miss Betsy recommend for David? Ans. Lawyer. 11. Steerforth helps the reader to understand which aspect of David's personality? Ans. His youthful innocence. 12. What best describes Dickens's purpose in presenting the accents of the characters? Ans. To indicate social class. 13. What is Dr. Strong's main concern in the novel? Ans. To work on his dictionary. 14. In this novel the ghost of old Hamlet is invoked on several occasions in reference to the pacing of which character? Ans. Mr. Chillip. 15. Why is Mr. Dick unable to finish the memorial? Ans. He can't stop writing about Charles first.